Hey y'all, I am Bo Beach. This is the Free Speech Podcast where we are going to discuss Nashville commercial real estate news, politics, culture, and even a little sports mixed in. The idea of the podcast is to speak to you in a casual, authentic style and quickly bring you up to date on all the current events that you need to know about. I am going to try to get through each of these 12 storylines without pontificating. I'll do my best. Let's get started. I'm going to give you an overview of all the topics we're going to discuss today. The Transit Welfare Plan. We just got an actuarial update on what it is going to cost over a 15-year period. I'm going to bring you up to date on that crazy number and make an argument why this should be voted down for a number of different reasons. Number two, we're going to talk about the Cool Springs Galleria in Williamson County, Tennessee's largest shopping mall, and how they plan to revamp it and unlock a lot of the value that exists in the 86 acres that they have there. We're going to talk about Backyard Burgers, a once prosperous restaurant chain that is on its deathbed. I'm going to tell you that story. We're going to look at consumer confidence by way of auto loans that are now becoming delinquent and what that means for our broader consumer confidence. We're going to talk about why Marriott and Hilton and Hyatt don't actually own any hotels. In fact, 99% of the hotels with those brands on the side of the building are owned by private investors, not by those brands themselves. This is a topic that really confuses people that are not in the commercial real estate business. So I'm going to give you a way to think about that. We're going to talk about how Vanderbilt basketball fired their coach, lost all of their players, and have since uh, rebounded with a new coach, a whole new roster, and are outperforming expectations thus far. I'm going to give you a quick update on the NBA playoffs and give you some ideas on why it might be the time to tune in. We're going to talk about how boys who are molested by homosexual men are much, much more likely to become homosexual men and what we can do about it as a society, right? The numbers are going to shock you. This is a disgusting topic, but we can't just put our head in the sand. As a society, it's time to start taking action to get this situation under control. The illogical empathy that has taken over our country is ruining our country. We need to get back to a value-based system. And I'll give you some ideas on how we get there. We're going to talk about how Red Lobster is very, very close to going out of business as well. I'm going to tell you the story of how we've gotten here. And I think it's an interesting one, the story of Red Lobster. We're going to talk about an inflation check, right? You know, people are trying to gaslight us on the rampant inflation in our country that is being caused by mismanagement of our federal government. I'm going to give you some specific examples from 2019 versus 2024, how the lowest cost food items have gone up so dramatically. I'll give you a number of different examples from McDonald's, Taco Bell, and Chick-fil-A over that 5-year period. We're going to talk about how the largest parking operator in North America now dominates the Nashville parking business and what that could mean for prices going forward. And lastly, we're going to talk about WeWork, the co-working business that kind of put co-working on the map. They are exiting their flagship location in downtown Nashville as part of a bankruptcy restructuring. I'm going to walk you through that story as well. So let's get into it. You know, in previous shows, we've discussed the transit plan that uh, residents of Nashville will be voting on at the same time they vote for president in November. That transit plan has a $3.1 billion upfront price tag, right? But what they've recently released over the last week is what is the total cost of this project, if approved, over 15 years, right? And what they found is $3.1 billion upfront, $111 million every year just to operate it. So for over a 15-year period, we're talking about a total price tag of this transit plan that you will be voting on in November, $6.9 billion. Now, keep in mind, they're trying to convince you that this transit plan will be funded with a 0.5 percentage point increase in the local sales tax, right? But the truth of the matter is that sales tax increase will only cover 47% of that total $6.9 billion price tag. It's not even going to be funded 50% by sales tax. The remainder is going to have to come from other places, right? So we've talked a lot about the transit plan in previous episodes, so I don't want to belabor it too much here. But I will tell you that if you've been listening, I call it the transit welfare plan, right? Because while I do think a transit fund is in the best interest of Nashville going forward, I do not trust our elected officials to actually spend that money in a way that solves the problems we want solved. So what are the problems we want solved? We want less congestion on our roads, right? Especially during rush hour. We want to be able to get around the city faster, right? The $6.9 billion that these guys plan to spend are not even going to touch our congestion issues. The bulk of the money being spent here is on a bus service, right? So the only way a bus service is going to materially affect the congestion in Nashville is we are going to need folks that are used to driving from their home all the way to their office and walking up the elevator, walking up the stairs to their office. The idea is they are going to just completely change the way they get to work. They're now going to drive their car to some parking lot near a bus stop, park their car, wait for a bus, take the bus with a bunch of random people all the way into the city, get off at a bus stop, and then walk from that bus stop to wherever their final destination is. Boy, that sure sounds inconvenient to me. And anybody that has the means to drive from their house to their place of work directly is going to continue to do so, right? So how is this transit welfare plan actually going to solve the problem of congestion in Nashville? I argue it will not. I argue this is a welfare plan for people that take the bus. And everyone gets to pay for it, right? And then even once you pay for it, it's still 50% underfunded. And that money is going to have to come from somewhere. And where they're going to steal that money from in the future to fill that shortfall remains to be seen, right? So it is my recommendation as someone that works in the commercial real estate business that talks a lot about congestion in Nashville, talks a lot about rush hour traffic, talks a lot about the condition of our roadways. It was my recommendation that this gets voted down exactly the way it did 6 years ago, the last time it was on the ballot. And 6 years ago, it was voted down 64% no, 36% yes. So it was crushed at the ballot box. And I hope that the average resident does not fall for this because the price tag is lower and the sales tax increase is lower. I get it. We need dedicated transit funding in Nashville, and that transit funding should go to improving our roadways, making it easier to get our vehicles from one place to the next. But I have absolutely no faith in our elected officials, and that's how that money is going to be spent. They want to spend it on sidewalks. They want to spend it on bus lanes. They want to spend it on additional bus stops, around the clock bus service. They want to spend it on, developments around bus stops. None of that is going to change the congestion that we experience in Nashville. None of that is going to fix the potholes. So they're taking $7 billion in the name of transit and not fixing the transit problem. And for that, I recommend you vote no, just like you did 6 years ago, just like you did the time before that they tried to pass transit funding. They're not trying to fix the problems that you want fixed. They are trying to fund their welfare transit projects. And you get to vote on whether or not you're going to allow that to happen. Number 2, let's talk about the Cool Springs Galleria revamp. As I mentioned, thought to be Tennessee's largest mall at over 1 million square feet, 150 stores on 86 acres. It opened in 1991. It's currently owned by a large investor out of Chattanooga. What they plan to do here is unlock value in that 86 acres. So the Cool Springs area, very desirable area, not much land available to build on. They're unlocking that 86 acres. They're going to construct 77,000 square feet of new restaurant and retail buildings. They're going to build 2 apartment buildings with 600 total apartments. They're going to build a 120-room hotel, which 120 rooms is just about the sweet spot for building hotels today. Most of the new hotels coming out of the ground are between 100 and 130 units. 120 seems to be the sweet spot. All of this happening on existing parking lots. So I think this is good for Cool Springs. I think this is a wise investment decision. I think this is putting unused parking to work, and I think this is going to be an awesome project when complete. So cheers to the owners in Chattanooga of the Cool Springs Galleria Mall. It's going to get better. The future is bright in Williamson County. My children constantly begging me to take them to the Cool Springs Galleria Mall. So I'm there all the time. Very classy, very safe place to be, very easy to get in and out of. High quality shopping mall. Gets even better in Williamson County. Now let's talk about the story of Backyard Burgers, right? Very, very close to dead, y'all. The moral to this story is if you're a lover of backyard burgers, first of all, there's not many of you that can say that. But if you are, I would go get your sandwiches now, because I do not think Backyard Burgers is going to be around much longer, right? This is a business that was originally based in Memphis. In 2007, it moved its headquarters to Nashville, right? In 2013, it declared bankruptcy the first time, closing 19 restaurants. Now, keep in mind, at peak, there were 160 Backyard Burgers locations in this country. We are now down to 11 restaurants in 6 states. Another inflection point of this business, in 2017, a controlling interest was bought in Backyard Burgers by NFL player Muhsin Muhammad, right? So someone that made their money being an athlete invests it into one of the most difficult businesses on planet Earth, restaurants. And I do not think that was a wise thing to do. I do not think it benefited the business whatsoever. I think Backyard Burgers is very close to being dead. From 160 locations down to only 11. You heard it here first. If you love Backyard Burgers, go get that burger right away, because you are not going to have the option to much longer. Goodbye, Backyard Burgers. It's been fun. Number 4, did you know 1 in 12 auto loans is now delinquent? This speaks directly to how tapped out the average consumer is today, right? When our government leaders chose to shut down private business in an overreaction to a man-made new cold virus, the ripple effect cannot be understated. I am on record from the moment this was happening that this is a overreaction, and the benefits of shutting down private business is going to be overwhelmed by the astronomical cost to society for having done so. That has played out exactly the way I predicted. The consumer is now tapped out. Folks that had to buy a vehicle in the last 3 years were forced to pay inflated prices. Most vehicles are financed, so they paid an inflated price. They used high cost financing to do so. And now we're in a position where vehicle prices have gone back down. Interest rates are still high, so that those vehicles are often worth less than that borrower owes on the note, right? So those vehicles are underwater, and the borrower is struggling to make payments because many people don't know the average interest rate on a used car loan is something like 14% right now. Huge interest rate. So you've got these massive payments for these cars that are now underwater. And what you're going to see is a lot of the keys to these vehicles are going to be handed over to the lender. Anytime an asset is worth less than the debt that's owed on that asset, that's when keys start to get turned over to lenders. And we're starting to see it. 1 out of 12 auto loans is now delinquent. People are unable to make their payments or are choosing not to in an effort to give that vehicle back to the lender. This is a direct reflection of the weakness of the consumer right now. I see it in my business. The consumer is tapped out. We went from this place 4 years ago where we had high savings, right? High personal savings. All the savings, if you look at the numbers, have been depleted to zero. And even worse, people are out of savings, so now they're starting to max out credit cards. So our savings went down dramatically, our credit card use went up substantially, and now that credit card use is at, of course, higher interest rates. You're seeing this all over the place. You're seeing people pull back on vacations. You're seeing people pull back on eating out. I'm seeing it in people pulling back on purchasing commercial real estate, the business that I'm in. I don't think the average person sees clearly how much financial distress those around us really are. We're all kind of playing along, trying to keep up with the Joneses, keep up with appearances. The average person is tapped out. Their credit card usage is up, and you're going to see continued defaults, especially in the auto sector. And it's a scary place to be. We really need to get our act together in this country. And we're going to need to make some difficult decisions. And we're going to have to get rid of this idea of illogical empathy for everyone. And we're going to start needing to make logical decisions that position society for success in the future. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Did you know that Marriott, Hilton, and Hyatt don't own 99% of the hotels with their names on it? This is something that really confuses people, because 2/3 of all hotels in the United States have branding from those three companies, right? They have sub brands, but those are the three heavy hitters. And 2/3 of the hotels in our country have their name on the side. How can that be if 99% of the hotels are not owned by those groups? Well, the way it works is anybody can go out and buy a hotel building, right? Joe Schmo goes out and buys a hotel building. They strike a deal with Marriott, Hilton, or Hyatt to put their name on the building, to get access to their customers, to get access to their technology, to their branding, And then most of the time, they go out and hire a third-party management team too. So in every hotel, you've got three different groups involved, right? You've got the owner of the real estate, you've got the third-party property management company that's providing all the people that you interact with on a daily basis, and then you've got the brands that are lending their brand, their technology, their frequent traveler programs, those types of things. And if you put all three of those together, you get the average Marriott, Hilton, or Hyatt that you've visited, I'm sure, many, many times. Most people think Marriott owns the building and employs all the people that work there. That's absolutely not true. Less than 1% of the time that is true. There are generally three different parties working together in each of those hotels: the owner, the management company, and the brand. We could talk a lot about that, and maybe I'll build on that in future episodes, but we need to keep moving. I told you I would not pontificate, and I'm trying hard not to. Let's talk about Vanderbilt basketball, right? So we're going to talk sports for just a minute. Vanderbilt basketball had a really rough year last year. Historically, not respected as a real powerhouse program, but even last year was below expectations. Jerry Stackhouse, a former NBA player, got fired as coach. They went out and hired a guy called Mark Byington, the head coach of James Madison. As soon as Stackhouse got fired, 9 players, basically all the players that played, entered the transfer portal and left. So you've got a new coach with no players. Since then, the new coach has brought in 10 new transfer portal players. The Hall rated the 26th best in the nation, right? So the new coach has done really well going out and getting good players, right? 26 in the nation, that's overperforming for Vanderbilt standards. They've also got 2 incoming freshmen that were actually in high school. The way that we used to recruit to college is you recruit high school players. They come play for you and make them better. Eventually, they get on the court. That's not truly the case anymore. Most of these college teams are now comprised of transfer players. So it's very difficult for a high school player to make it to one of these big D1 programs. Nevertheless, they've got 2 incoming, one being Tyler Tanner from Brentwood Academy, a player that my son and I have followed very closely. I am a basketball guy. My son is a good basketball player. We follow Brentwood Academy. We do all of our training there. We know all the players. We know all the trainers. We know all the coaches. We've been following Tyler Tanner for the last 3 years, who is a very, very high quality person and a very good player. He is one of the 2 freshmen joining Vanderbilt next year, along with a guy called Karis Bilal out of Riverwood. So they've got 2 high school players joining the program and 10 new transfer portal players joining the program. Vanderbilt has outperformed this offseason. Let's see if they can translate that into success in the SEC next season. That will be a fun team to watch, a more fun team to watch than maybe Vanderbilt's put on the court in quite a while. Let's talk about where we are in the NBA playoffs right now, because I know a lot of folks don't start watching the NBA until deep into the playoffs. And that's kind of where we are right now. We're down to our final 4 teams, right? The 6th place Indiana Pacers, believe it or not, are playing the number 1 ranked Boston Celtics, right? The Boston Celtics have been the favorite to win the NBA championship all season. They've been dominant. They added a center this year called Kristaps Porzingis, right, which really changed their team for the better. The challenge and the thing to watch with them is he has been injured. No one knows for sure when he's coming back. Until he can get on the court, the Indiana Pacers might be able to knock them off. So until the Celtics get healthy, you watch out. There might be an upset alert going on with the lowly Indiana Pacers, who really don't have any marketable names or superstars. But if they get Porzingis back in that 5 position, the Celtics beat the Pacers and the Celtics win the NBA championship. On the other side, you've got the number 5 Dallas Mavericks playing the number 3 Minnesota Timberwolves. Right? I would argue that the Timberwolves are the surprise of the NBA season. The Timberwolves haven't been good in 20 years. You'd have to go all the way back to the days of Kevin Garnett to really put a formidable team on the court. They just knocked off the Denver Nuggets, the reigning champions. Jokic is the 3-time MVP. They just knocked him off in 7 games and did so without their superstar really playing well in Game 7. So the T-Wolves are very fun to watch. They are very, very solid defensively, which is fun to see in the NBA. So I think the Celtics are going to win the NBA championship. I'm rooting for the Minnesota Timberwolves. I like how they play. I like their style. I just think I think they're fun to watch. So I'm rooting for a Celtics T-Wolves championship. But I think you could argue that the NBA championship is wide open at this point because of the Celtics injury issues. So if you haven't been watching the NBA playoffs, I think now would be a great time to tune in. Every game is a battle. You know, the referees let them play. The defense is really ramped up. Every shot is important. It's just it's a fun time to be watching NBA basketball, and you can't say that about the entire season. But right now, it's getting fun. So if you haven't tuned in yet, try to check out the T-Wolves. They're a very, very fun team to watch. Now, let's get into the weeds a little bit. I'm going to try not to get myself in too much trouble here. I'm going to give you a trigger warning. We're going to call this politics talk. And what I don't think people are honest with themselves about is the cause of homosexuality, right? In our illogical empathy, we jump to the conclusion that people are born homosexual, right? That's what you've always heard. They can't help it. They were born that way. It turns out that's not true. It turns out you can make homosexual men by molesting them as boys. 46% of gay men were molested by a homosexual man while they were a boy. 22% of lesbian women were molested by a lesbian woman while they were a girl. Now, if we look at the heterosexual side, only 7% of heterosexual men were molested, and 1% of heterosexual women were molested, right? So it is clear that we have more gay men in this country because more boys are getting molested by gay men. We have more lesbian women in this country because more girls are being molested by lesbian women. This is not something that's naturally occurring in all cases. I think intuitively, we've kind of known this, right? You know, a boy that gets molested by a man is much more likely to be a homosexual himself later in life. And as a society, we need to make a stand here. You know, this is the kind of illogical empathy that is ruining our society today. This is just one example of course. This is, you know, this might not even be in the top 10 things that we need to fix in our country, right? But this is one of those things. And the reason that I'm so triggered by this is our values have gotten so skewed that we don't even protect children anymore. You know, children need adult protection until they are adults. And why we don't take that more seriously, I have no idea. Right? So, how do we solve for this? Well, we make the penalty for homosexuals molesting children so great that those homosexuals will fight off their primal urges to molest children. So what would that look like? Well, first of all, how about we don't teach children about homosexuality until they're adults? How about all homosexual discussion is forbidden until that child becomes an adult? right? Why don't we just keep that information away from them until they are an adult that has a brain that can comprehend it? That's number one. No more exposure to homosexuality for children, right? On the flip side, if a homosexual person molests a child and that child is prepubescent, that person should get the death penalty. Anyone that molests a prepubescent child is not worthy of this world and should be executed. I know a lot of softies out there think, oh no, they're minor attracted people. They can't help it. Well, the world would be a better place if they were dead. That's the fact of the matter. Now, if they molest a child that is post-pubescent, right? I think the penalty for that is chemical castration, right? You molest a child, you will never molest another child ever, because we are going to take away your sexual desire. We are going to take away your ability to have sex. We are going to chemically castrate you. You either are going to be executed or chemically castrated if you touch a child. And I think this problem sorts itself out, right? We need real men and women with values to get involved. Enough of this, they were born that way. The data suggests that is not true. The data is clear that you can create more homosexuals by molesting them as children. We absolutely have to address this, and we need to do it in a way that will actually work. The slap on the wrist stuff that is dominating our country is not working. Society is moving in the wrong direction. And as we start to right this ship to a more values-based society, we have to start by protecting the children. Once you're an adult, you can do whatever you please, okay? But until you're an adult, you are off limits. You are untouchable. You will not corrupt their mind or their body, or there will be substantial costs for doing so, and those costs will be enforced. I know we live in a society where this seems harsh. I know we want to come up with excuses about, there's a way for us to all live in utopia together, and all it takes is empathy for one another. That is absolute madness, and I do not want to live in that place. Your idea of utopia is not my idea of utopia. And we have to start by protecting children at all costs. Children have to be off limits in this country, and whatever it takes to make that true needs to happen ASAP. I'll vote for that all day long, and I don't care who thinks that it's a horrible idea. All right, let's keep moving. Red Lobster, bankrupt. $1 billion in debt. $1 billion to only $30 million in cash. In 2014, Darden Restaurants, one of the largest owners of chain restaurants in the country, sold Red Lobster to a private equity group. That private equity group sale leasebacked all of their locations, right? Whereby what that means is Red Lobster, the business, signed a long-term lease to remain in the property, and then they sold the property to a third-party investor who is the landlord and collects the rent. They agreed to pay higher than market rent for each of their locations in an effort to increase the value of the property, right? So the PE group says, hey, we're going to sign these huge leases, which are going to make these properties really valuable. We're going to flip the properties to investors. We're going to take all of that cash, and then we'll just pay rent every month. Well, the PE group, after they did that, right, private equity guys are very smart. They flipped it. They flipped the business to what's called Thai Union Group, which is the owner of the Chicken by the Sea brand. They're a seafood group, right? So this Thai Union Group says, you know what? We're going to vertically integrate. We're going to buy a business that will actually sell our shrimp for us. So we can harvest the shrimp from the ocean and we'll sell it through our restaurants, right? That was their brilliant plan. Turns out Red Lobster's $20 endless shrimp deal, which, I'm not a Red Lobster guy, but it seems that's one of their more popular offerings. That offering alone cost them $11 million. They lost $11 million just on the cost of shrimp based on the endless shrimp deal for $20. So Thai Union Group is dumping its shrimp on the 576 restaurants that Red Lobster operates. They're the only shrimp vendor available to those Red Lobster restaurants. They're increasing their prices for that shrimp and they're lowering their quality, right? So they're dumping all of this shrimp on the restaurants. So imagine this, you've got Red Lobster that's paying these crazy rents to stay in their buildings. Now they're paying higher prices for all of their shrimp while the quality goes down. What's the net result of that? Sales are down 30% since 2019. So your sales are down, your costs are up, you've had 5 CEOs in 5 years, and you're owned by a group that is in the seafood business, harvesting seafood from our oceans. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a recipe for disaster. This is not going to work. 5 CEOs in 5 years, sales down 30%, costs up, and you've got an ownership group that doesn't know what they're doing. Red Lobster, it's on its way out. It's going to take longer than it's going to take for backyard burgers. But if you love Red Lobster, get your $20 endless shrimp while you can. Red Lobster is also going to be gone very soon. All right, we've got 3 more topics to discuss today. I'm going to give you an inflation check, right? So, we get gaslighted a lot. Oh, inflation's not that big of a deal. Inflation is absolutely a big deal. It is absolutely the federal government's fault, right? McDonald's cheeseburger in 2019 was $1. In 2024, it's $3.15. A medium fry from McDonald's in 2019, $1.79. In 2024, $4.19. Mind you, folks that don't have a lot of money to spend, they live off fast food. They cannot afford for the prices of fast food to double and triple. Taco Bell, a beefy 5-layer burrito in 2019, $1.69. Now, $3.69. A Nachos Bel Grande, $3.29 in 2019. Now, $5.89. Chick-fil-A, a chicken sandwich deluxe in 2019, $3.65. Today, $6.55. 4 chicken strips, $4.39 in 2019, all the way up to $7.85 on average today. Anybody that tells you inflation is not a problem is a fool, is an ideological fool that is choosing their political team over accepting reality. When Joe Biden won the presidency, I remember distinctly, I have a family member, so I don't associate with many Democrats, right? But family is family. And I had a family member in my kitchen trying to make the argument that Joe Biden was going to make the country stronger. And I said, I think you are totally wrong about that. You are blinded by your ideology. There's no reason to think that's true. All of the things that he ran on are going to make this country worse. He said, well, what is your biggest concern with Joe Biden? I said, Joe Biden is going to ruin our economy. And they just laughed. And what has he done? Well, cheeseburger used to be $1, now it's $3.15, right? Home mortgages used to be 3%, now they're 7%, right? Everything has gotten more expensive. Regulation up, taxes up, and they'd love to tax you more than they have. You give them an opportunity to tax you more than they have, and they're going to take it. Immigration totally and completely out of control, a national security issue. Everything in this country has gotten worse under the leadership of Joe Biden. Now, I'm not one that thinks, oh, everything will be perfect if we could just get the other team in office, right? In fact, what I'd like to see happen is the federal government shrink by 80%. Take the power away from the federal government, return it to the states the way that our framers intended it to be. Reduce the cost and scope and regulation of the federal government and return the power to the states. Have 50 different styles of living whereby you get to choose the state you live in. If you want to be in a place that has lots of government services, you get to choose the state that has lots of government services and high taxes. If you want to be in a state with few government services, more freedom, less taxes, you choose a red state. That's what I ultimately like to see happen, right? Maybe it's delusional, but I think we're getting to such a horrible place, at minimum financially in this country, that there may be a opportunity to start acting on it, because the reality is at the federal level, it's always going to flip-flop back and forth. Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. So clearly we would be in better shape with Republican leadership. Clearly. Not based on the person, the name, the personality, but the ideas, right? The ideas for how our country should work. The Republican ideas of governments are far superior to the Democrat ideals of government, which you've seen over the last 3.5 years. But then, we've got delusional people in this country that maybe in 4 or 8 years are going to vote in those same bad ideas, right? So the only way to really solve the issue is to drastically downsize the size, scope, and cost of federal government. And if we don't figure it out, I'm telling you, in our near future, states are going to start making alliances and discuss leaving our union of states. That would mean dissolving the United States of America into different groups. I don't think it's going to take a civil war to do it. I think it would be negotiated similar to what England did with Brexit. It was painful. Both sides didn't like the outcome that they got, but they got it done. And I think that is in our future in this country if we don't drastically clean house at the federal level. And I think I'll leave it at that. Let's keep moving. 2 more stories. The largest parking operator in North America now dominates Nashville. And believe it or not, the company is only 7 years old, known as Metropolis Technologies. They bought Premier Parking in 2022, which had 30,000 parking spaces. They now just closed on the purchase of SP Plus Corp in May, paying another $1.5 billion. Metropolis Technologies now owns 200 parking lots and garages in Nashville. They are also treating Nashville as its co-headquarters. In fact, they have 13,000 square feet of office space at 5th and Broadway, very expensive office space, and they need more. So what does this mean for Nashville? Well, we're approaching monopoly territory here, right? And the reason that monopolies are illegal is because they can now charge prices without any real competition. So they're able to increase prices on the consumer without any real cost for having done so. So that's the fear here. You've got one company dominating downtown Nashville parking, right? And anybody that's been downtown Nashville realizes that most of the parking is not owned by if you go to an office building, the owner of that office building doesn't usually own the parking for that office building. You have to pay for parking from a third party at a nearby garage, right? So you're kind of in a precarious position if you're in need of parking downtown. And really what you're competing with downtown is more of a tourist-driven parker rather than an office building-driven parker. The tourist is able to pay a larger amount for a couple hours of parking than you're going to pay for an entire day while you work. So you're going to get pushed out by the tourism-driven parker when you're just trying to get to your office. So you've got a lot of upward pressure on pricing of parking downtown. And I don't think this acquisition is going to alleviate any of that upward pricing pressure. Now, one thing that's interesting about this operator, they're called Metropolis Technologies, which is a weird name for a parking operator, right? The reason they do that is they've got no gates on their parking structures or their parking lots. They use cameras to read license plates, and those drivers are automatically billed for the true cost of parking while they use it. So they're actually using technology to get people in and out of these parking structures and parking lots faster, but are doing so at a higher cost, right? So very interesting use of technology. I'm not sure it bodes well for the total cost of parking downtown, which perhaps is a talking point for why one would want to take the bus. But I think the cost of parking would have to get much, much higher for the average person to want to deal with all of the extra inefficiencies that come from taking a bus. And a lot of people just aren't real excited about sharing space with other people that they don't know. Public transportation has a negative connotation, right? And for good reason, because a crazy homeless person could be sitting next to you. A 400-pound stinky person could be sitting right next to you, right? If you're a woman, you're in close proximity to a lot of people that may be dangerous, right? There's a lot of reasons why public transportation is not taken, right? And I'm not sure that the cost of parking downtown is high enough yet to really take on all of those other obstacles to avoid it. And lastly, WeWork. The original co-working center, WeWork. And I'll tell you, I previously owned and operated two different co-working centers. I'd go head to head with WeWork, and I knew even back then, this was, started maybe 10 years ago. I knew WeWork was losing money back then. There's never been a time that WeWork has existed where they've been profitable. They're still around. They're still just declaring bankruptcy over and over and over. And each time they declare bankruptcy, they spin off another location that's not profitable. And that's exactly what's happening to their flagship location in downtown, a 4-story space. Their first ever location in Nashville is now closing. And the reason for the timing on that is TikTok, who just signed one of the largest office deals of the year to move to Music Row, they were actually occupying 3 full floors of WeWork's 4 floors. So they've got 75% vacancy with TikTok moving out. That's why they are rejecting, as they call it, rejecting the lease for the downtown location as part of their most current bankruptcy restructuring. They've also got locations in Midtown and Music Row. Those two locations will be staying open. Interestingly, WeWork is not the dominant player in co-working space in Nashville. You've got other local operations and, of course, Regis that are far larger than WeWork. So we'll see how long their other two locations last. But as of right now, they are still in business. And they're also claiming that part of the reason why their downtown location failed, even though I think it's because they just lost 3 of the 4 floors all at once. It's a terrible business plan to go from 3 floors occupied to 3 floors vacant the next day. The larger trend of office users leaving downtown for Midtown, Music Row, and Germantown. That is true, right? You're seeing large office users exit downtown. They're looking at Midtown, they're looking at Music Row, they're looking at Germantown. They're trying to get away from the congestion, the noise, the homeless people, the partying, the drunks, the craziness. I can see why businesses would conclude that the most appropriate place to work from 9 to 5 each day is not in the middle of this party zone where people are just tearing it up at all hours of the day. So that rounds out today's show. I hope I've brought you up to date on some of the biggest Nashville commercial real estate stories of the week. I've given you some hot takes on politics, culture, and updated you quickly on sports. I appreciate you so much for tuning in. Until next week, I'll talk to you then.